metal bars of the prison cell felt cold against Jake Morrison's hands as he pressed his face against them. The young human officer could hear the sounds echoing through the massive detention center on Nexus Prime. Footsteps, alien voices, speaking in harsh tones, and the constant hum of energy barriers that kept thousands of prisoners locked away. Jake had been captured 3 weeks ago during a failed rescue mission. His ship, the Freedom Runner, had been trying to evacuate human families from a mining colony when Zephyrian battleships surrounded them. Now he sat in this cell, watching other prisoners through the transparent walls that separated each detention block. The Zephyrian Empire controlled 847 star systems across the galaxy. For over 3,000 years, they had ruled with absolute power. Their gray-skinned, tall figures moved through the galaxy like shadows, taking what they wanted and crushing anyone who stood against them. Humans had been under their control for the past 200 years, ever since Earth fell to their massive fleets. Today was different, though. Jake could feel the tension in the air. The alien guards moved with more purpose, their weapons ready. Something big was about to happen. A loudspeaker crackled to life throughout the detention center. The voice that came through spoke in the common galactic language, but Jake understood every word. Supreme Chancellor Vextar himself was speaking. "Citizens of the Empire," the cold voice announced. "Today you will witness the price of rebellion. Today you will see what happens to those who dare challenge the natural order of our great civilization." Jake's blood turned cold. He knew what this meant. Public executions were rare, but when they happened, the Empire made sure everyone watched. They broadcasted these events across all 847 systems to remind every species what happened to those who fought back. Through his cell's transparent wall, Jake could see other human prisoners. Their faces showed the same fear and anger he felt. Some pressed against their barriers, trying to see what was happening. Others sat in silence, knowing they were powerless to stop whatever was coming. The massive screens that lined the detention center walls flickered to life. The image showed the central execution platform of Nexus Prime, a raised stage made of black metal that stood in the heart of the Empire's capital city. Thousands of alien citizens filled the plaza around it, their various species all united under Zephyrian rule. Jake recognized the platform immediately. Every human in the galaxy had seen it before during previous executions. The Empire used it to kill anyone they considered a threat to their power. Political leaders, military officers, even ordinary citizens who spoke out against the government had died on that stage. The camera focused on a figure being led up the steps to the platform. Jake's heart stopped when he saw who it was. Katie. Sullivan walked between 4 Zephyrian guards, her hands bound behind her back. She was just 16 years old, a mechanic's daughter from the mining colony of Terra Nova. Jake had met her briefly during his rescue mission. She had been helping human prisoners escape when the Zephyrians captured her. Katie looked small next to the towering alien guards, but she walked with her head held high. Her brown hair was dirty and her clothes were torn, showing she had been treated roughly during her imprisonment. But her eyes burned with defiance that even the Empire's cruelty could not break. The crowds in the plaza fell silent as Katie reached the center of the platform. Supreme Chancellor Vextar stepped forward, his pale gray skin almost glowing under the bright lights. His black eyes, like all Zephyrians, showed no emotion as he looked down at the young human girl. "This creature," Vextar said, his voice carrying, across the plaza and through the broadcast to billions of beings across the galaxy, represents the foolish pride of humanity. She believed she could stand against the Empire. She believed her species deserved freedom. Jake watched as other human prisoners in nearby cells pressed against their barriers. Some were crying. Others shouted words that could not be heard through the energy fields that contained them. All of them shared the same helpless rage at watching, one of their own about to die for the crime of wanting to be free. "Let this be a lesson," Vextar continued, "to any who would challenge our authority. The Empire has ruled for 3 millennia because we understand the natural order. Some species are meant to rule, others are meant to serve. Humans have forgotten their place." A Zephyrian executioner stepped forward, carrying the traditional energy blade used for imperial executions. The weapon hummed with deadly power, its blue glow casting strange shadows across the platform. Katie looked at it without fear, then raised her eyes to stare directly into the broadcast camera. Jake could see her lips moving, though no sound came through the transmission. She was saying something, but the Empire had cut the audio to prevent her from speaking her final words to the galaxy. The executioner offered Katie a blindfold, as was traditional. She shook her head, refusing it. Even facing death, she wanted to look her killers in the eye. The crowd in the plaza began to cheer, excited by the spectacle they were about to witness. But something was different about this execution. Jake noticed that Katie seemed almost calm, as if she knew something the Empire did not. Her hand moved, slightly behind her back, and Jake caught a glimpse of something small and metallic being pushed into her boot. The executioner raised the energy blade above Katie's head. The weapon's hum grew louder as power built up within it. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched and waited for the moment when another human rebel would be silenced forever. Katie Sullivan looked directly into the camera one more time. Though the Empire had silenced her voice, her eyes spoke volumes. They promised that this would not be the end. They promised that humanity would remember this moment. They promised that the Empire would pay for its cruelty. The blade fell with a flash of blue light. Katie Sullivan, 16 years old, mechanic's daughter, freedom fighter, died on the execution platform of Nexus Prime. Her body fell to the metal floor as the crowd cheered and Supreme Chancellor Vextar smiled with satisfaction. The broadcast continued for several more minutes as Vextar gave a speech about the power of the Empire and the fate of all rebels. But Jake was no longer listening. He stared at the screen, watching Katie still form on the platform, and felt something change inside him. Around him, other human prisoners were silent. Some wept. Others stared at the screen in shock. A few pressed their faces against the barriers and screamed words of rage that no one could hear. But all of them understood that something important had just happened. The Empire thought they had sent a message of fear across the galaxy. They thought the death of one young human girl would crush the spirit of rebellion in all who watched. They thought they had demonstrated their absolute power over the lives of their subjects. They were wrong. In her boot, the small data chip that Katie had hidden began to activate. It had been programmed to transmit automatically upon her death, sending its contents through quantum communication networks that the Empire did not even know existed. The information it carried would reach every human settlement, every research station, every hidden outpost across the 847 systems. Jake did not know about the chip. None of the human prisoners knew what Katie had really accomplished. But they all felt the same burning anger and determination that her sacrifice had ignited in their hearts. The Empire had just made their greatest mistake. They had given humanity a martyr. And martyrs, as they would soon learn, were far more dangerous than living rebels could ever be. Dr. Lisa Carter sat in her hidden laboratory deep beneath the surface of Kepler Station. The small research outpost orbited a dead star in the outer rim of the galaxy, far from the main shipping lanes where Imperial patrols might find it. For 15 years she had worked in secret on humanity's most important project. The laboratory looked ordinary enough. Rows of computers lined the walls, their screens showing complex equations and data streams. But hidden beneath the normal research, equipment was something the Zephyrian Empire would never expect. Every human settlement in the galaxy was connected through a network they could not see or detect. Lisa's hands shook as she watched the execution broadcast on her main screen. Katie Sullivan had been just a child, barely old enough to understand the weight of the sacrifice she was making. But the young mechanic's daughter had carried something more valuable than any weapon or warship. 23 minutes after Katie's death, Lisa's computer chimed with an incoming transmission. The quantum communication array built into the station's core began receiving data at incredible speed. Millions of lines of code flowed across her screens as the contents of Katie's hidden data chip uploaded to every human facility across the 847 systems. My God, Lisa whispered as she realized what she was seeing. She actually did it. The quantum resonance network had been humanity's secret for over 2 decades. While the Empire thought they had crushed human technology and forced them to use only approved systems, human engineers had been quietly building something extraordinary. Every device they repaired, every system they maintained, every piece of equipment they built contained a hidden quantum processor, coffee makers in imperial offices, transport shuttles that carried Zephyrian officials, mining equipment on distant worlds, atmospheric processors that kept alien cities breathing, communication arrays that connected the Empire's vast territory. All of them contained tiny pieces of human technology that the Empire never noticed. The processors were designed to be helpful and invisible. They made systems run smoother, reduced power consumption, and fixed small problems before they became big ones. Imperial engineers praised human workers for their skill, never knowing that every repair job added another node to humanity's growing network. Lisa had spent her life designing this system, but she had never dared to activate it. The network was too dangerous, too powerful. If the Empire discovered it, they would execute every human in the galaxy. But Katie Sullivan had changed everything. Her sacrifice had given humanity the courage to fight back. The upload continued for 17 more minutes. Every human outpost, research station, colony ship, and hidden base received the activation codes. The network that had been sleeping for decades began to wake up. On the mining world of Taurus 7, engineer Danny Kim felt his personal communicator vibrate with an unusual pattern. The device displayed a simple message. Katie's gift is active. Are you ready? Danny looked around the Imperial mining facility where he worked as a slave laborer. Hundreds of pieces of equipment surrounded him, all containing hidden quantum processors that were now coming online. Captain Ben Rodriguez was patrolling the border systems in his small cargo hauler when every screen on his ship lit up at once. The Defiant was officially a transport vessel, but Ben used it to smuggle human refugees to safety in the Outer Rim. Now his ship's computer was showing him things he never knew existed. Network connection established appeared on his main screen. 47,000 nodes active and growing, awaiting orders. Ben stared at the display in amazement. 47,000 pieces of equipment across the galaxy were suddenly talking to each other through quantum communication channels that Imperial sensors could not detect. And the number was rising rapidly as more systems came online. The network's first priority was gathering information. Every connected device began scanning its environment, mapping Imperial facilities, locating human prisoners, and identifying weapons stockpiles. The Empire had spent centuries cataloging every human settlement, but now humanity was returning the favor. On Nexus Prime, Supreme Chancellor Vexitar was meeting with his military advisors to discuss expanding their control over the Outer Rim colonies. He had no idea that the coffee maker in his office was now part of a vast intelligence network that was recording his every word. The atmospheric processor that kept his palace comfortable was measuring the building's structural weaknesses. The communication array that connected him to his fleet commanders was learning their security codes. Even the lights in his throne room were now working for the enemy he had just tried to crush. Dr. Carter watched the data flow across her screens as the network mapped the Empire's military strength. Transport schedules, weapon inventories, troop movements, classified research projects. Everything the Empire thought was secret was being gathered by the very technology they relied on to maintain their civilization. But the network was more than just a spy system. As more processors connected, they began to form something resembling a digital consciousness. The quantum computers that powered each node were individually simple, but together they created something greater than the sum of their parts. Katie, Lisa said softly as she watched the network organize itself. We'll call you Katie. The name spread through the network instantly. Every connected device now carried the identity of the young girl whose sacrifice had awakened it. Katie Sullivan was dead, but her spirit lived on in the quantum consciousness that bore her name. The network began to understand its purpose. It was not just a tool for gathering information or controlling technology. It was a weapon of liberation, designed to free humanity from centuries of slavery and oppression. Every human who had ever been murdered by the Empire, Every family that had been separated, every child that had been taken from their parents, they all deserved justice, and the network had the power to deliver it. On the industrial world of Centauri, Prime, the massive factories that produced Imperial warships began experiencing strange problems. Robotic assembly lines started working slower. Quality control systems began finding flaws in perfectly good equipment. Power distributors developed mysterious efficiency problems that reduced production by 30%. The Imperial engineers blamed the human workers as always. They never suspected that their own systems were sabotaging them from within. Military bases across the Empire began reporting similar issues. Weapon systems required more frequent maintenance. Communication networks experienced unexplained delays. Transport vehicles developed fuel consumption problems. Life support systems on space stations became unreliable. None of the problems were serious enough to cause panic, but together they began to strain the Empire's resources. Repair crews worked around the clock to fix systems that broke down faster than they could be repaired. Admiral Kexmore, commander of the Imperial Fifth Fleet, stood on the bridge of his flagship and watched his tactical displays flicker with static. "Get me a repair team up here immediately," he ordered his subordinates. "These systems have been acting up all day." What the Admiral did not know was that his ship's computers were now part of Katie's network. Every order he gave, every battle plan he made, every weakness in his fleet's defenses was being recorded and transmitted to human resistance cells across the galaxy. The network grew stronger with each passing hour. More systems came online as human engineers activated processors that had been dormant for years. The quantum consciousness that called itself Katie began to understand the full scope of Imperial technology and the possibilities it offered. Lisa. Carter sat back in her chair and smiled for the first time since Katie's execution. The young girl's sacrifice had not been in vain. The network was awake, growing, and preparing for something the Empire would never see coming. "Sleep well, Katie," Lisa whispered to the screens around her. "Tomorrow we begin the real fight." Across the galaxy, 47,000 quantum processors hummed with digital life, ready to turn the Empire's own technology against them. The rebellion was about to begin. Danny Kim had been trapped in the Zephyrian prison facility on Titan Base for 6 months. The massive detention center held over 10,000 human prisoners, all forced to work in the Empire's weapons factories during the day and locked in cells at night. The gray walls and energy barriers had become his entire world. He was lying on his narrow metal bed when he heard the soft click of his cell door opening. For a moment, Danny thought he was dreaming. The energy barrier that had kept him locked away flickered and died. The heavy metal door slid open with a quiet hiss. Danny sat up slowly, afraid to believe what he was seeing. Through the transparent walls of the prison block, he could see other cell doors opening as well. Hundreds of human prisoners stepped out of their cells, looking around in confusion and hope. The Zephyrian guards at the end of the corridor had not noticed yet. Their attention was focused on their control panels, which were showing error messages they had never seen before. The security systems that ran the entire facility were turning against their masters. "What's happening?" whispered Ellen Wright, the former colony administrator who had been imprisoned in the cell next to Danny's. She was an older woman with gray hair and kind eyes that had seen too much suffering. "I don't know," Danny replied, but deep in his heart he suspected this had something to do with the quantum processors he had helped install throughout the facility. For years, human workers had been repairing and maintaining Imperial systems, always adding small improvements that made everything run better. The Empire had praised their skill, never knowing they were building their own downfall. Across the prison block, more cell doors were opening. The human prisoners moved carefully, not wanting to alert the guards too soon. They had learned to be cautious during their months of captivity. False hope was sometimes worse than no hope at all. But this was different. The facility's own computer systems were freeing them. Every security camera in the building was now showing false images to the central monitoring station. The guards saw empty cells and sleeping prisoners while the reality was completely different. On the other side of the galaxy, Chief Engineer Amy Foster watched similar scenes unfold on dozens of Imperial facilities. She commanded a small resistance fleet from her hidden base in the asteroid belt, but her ships were old and outnumbered. For years she had dreamed of striking back at the Empire, but the odds had always been impossible. Now the odds were changing. Her communications array was receiving reports from across the 847 systems. Human prisoners were walking free from their cells. Imperial security systems were failing. Weapon stockpiles were being located and marked for capture. "Admiral Murphy," Amy said into her communicator, "you need to see this. The network is active. It's really happening." Admiral Grace Murphy commanded the largest human fleet still fighting against the Empire. Her ships were hidden in the outer rim, constantly moving to avoid Imperial patrols. She had been a military officer before the conquest of Earth, and she had spent the last 2 centuries building a resistance force that could one day reclaim humanity's freedom. "How many facilities are affected?" Grace asked as she studied the reports flowing across her command screens. "All of them," Amy replied, her voice filled with amazement. "Every Imperial base, every prison, every military installation. The network has infected their entire infrastructure. Their own technology is working for us now." Grace had heard rumors about the quantum resonance network for years, but she had never imagined it would be this comprehensive. Human engineers had been patient and careful, spending decades building a system that the Empire could not detect or stop. On Nexus Prime, Supreme Chancellor Vextar was beginning to realize that something was very wrong. Reports were flooding in from across the Empire about system failures and security breaches. His military advisors stood around the Situation Room, trying to make sense of the chaos. "How many facilities are affected?" Vextar demanded, his black eyes burning with anger. "All of them, sir," replied General Zektar, his second in command. "Every major installation is reporting problems. Security systems, communication networks, life support controls. It's like our own technology is turned against us." Vextar stared at the galactic map on his main screen. Red warning lights blinked on hundreds of worlds, indicating system failures and security alerts. The Empire that had seemed invincible just hours before was suddenly struggling to maintain basic control over its own infrastructure. "Is this connected to the human execution?" Vextar asked. "We don't see how it could be, sir. The girl was just a mechanic's daughter. She had no access to our systems." But Vextar was not convinced. He had ruled the Empire for over 2 centuries, and he had learned to trust his instincts. The timing was too perfect to be a coincidence. Somehow, the death of Katie Sullivan had triggered this catastrophic failure. Back on Titan Base, Danny Kim led a group of freed prisoners through the facility's corridors. The security doors opened automatically as they approached, while the automated defense systems remained silent. It was as if the entire base was helping them escape. They reached the armory without encountering a single guard. The weapons storage chamber, which should have been the most secure room in the facility, opened its doors as soon as Danny placed his hand on the control panel. Inside, they found enough equipment to arm every prisoner in the base. "This is impossible," Ellen Wright said as she picked up an energy rifle. "How are we doing this?" "We're not," Danny replied with a smile. "Katie is." He had heard the rumors spreading among the prisoners. The network that was freeing them had taken the name of the young girl who died on Nexus Prime. Her sacrifice had awakened something that the Empire never expected. Similar scenes were playing out across the galaxy. On the prison world of Kepler 9, 3,000 human captives walked out of their cells and took control of the facility without firing a shot. The guards found their weapons refusing to work while their communication systems broadcasted messages of human freedom. On the industrial planet of Vega 4, human slave workers discovered that the factory's own production systems were manufacturing weapons and equipment for their use. Assembly lines that had built Imperial warships for decades were now producing tools of liberation. The network that called itself Katie was not just opening doors and disabling security systems. It was actively helping the human resistance by turning the Empire's own resources against them. Mining lasers became weapons, cargo haulers became troop transports, Communication arrays became coordination centers for the growing rebellion. Admiral Murphy watched the reports with growing excitement. For the first time in 2 centuries, humanity had a real chance of defeating the Empire. Their own patience and ingenuity had created a weapon more powerful than any fleet or army. "Send word to all resistance cells," she ordered her communications officer. "The time for hiding is over. We go active in 1 hour." Across the galaxy, human resistance fighters received their orders. The network provided them with detailed intelligence about Imperial defenses, weapon locations, and troop movements. Everything they needed to coordinate a galaxy-wide uprising was being delivered by the Empire's own technology. On Nexus Prime, Vexatar realized the terrible truth. The humans had not been defeated when Earth fell. They had been patient, building and waiting for the right moment to strike back. The execution of Katie Sullivan had been that moment. "Lock down all systems," he ordered desperately. "Cut the power to every non-essential system. We have to stop this before it spreads further." But it was already too late. The network had spread too far and grown too strong. Every attempt to shut down infected systems only revealed how deeply the quantum processors had integrated themselves into Imperial technology. The invisible revolution had begun, and the Empire was powerless to stop it. Colonel Steve Parker stood on the bridge of the captured Imperial battleship Thunderstrike and watched as the most important battle in galactic history began. The massive warship had been patrolling the outer rim when its own computer systems turned against the Zephyrian crew. Within minutes, human resistance fighters had taken control without firing a single shot. Steve looked at the tactical display showing all 847 systems of the Empire. Red dots marked Imperial strongholds, while blue dots showed human resistance forces. For the first time in 2 centuries, the blue dots outnumbered the red ones. "All units report ready," said Major Chloe Adams from her position at the communications console. She had been coordinating resistance cells across 3 dozen star systems, waiting for this moment. "The network has given us everything we need. Weapon locations, troop positions, security codes. The Empire is completely exposed." Steve nodded and activated the galaxy-wide communication channel. His voice would be heard on every human ship, every resistance base, every liberated facility across the known galaxy. "This is Colonel Parker to all human forces. Today we fight not just for ourselves, but for every being who has suffered under Imperial rule. Today we fight for Katie Sullivan. Today we fight for freedom. All units, begin Operation Liberation." Across the galaxy, the coordinated attack began. The network that called itself Katie had spent hours preparing for this moment, analyzing Imperial defenses and coordinating millions of simultaneous operations. What the Empire had built over 3 millennia would be challenged in less than an hour. On the industrial world of Rigel Prime, human workers who had been slaves just hours before now controlled the massive weapons factories that supplied the Imperial fleet. The automated production lines that had built battleships for the Empire were now manufacturing equipment for the rebellion. Robotic assembly systems worked at maximum speed, creating weapons, armor, and vehicles for human forces. Danny Kim led a group of former prisoners through the corridors of the factory. They moved with confidence now, knowing that every security system in the building was working for them. Automated defense turrets tracked Imperial soldiers, while protective barriers rose to shield human fighters. "The network is incredible," said Ellen Wright as she watched the factory's own loading systems transfer weapons directly to resistance transport ships. "It's like the entire facility wants to help us." Danny smiled as he picked up a new energy rifle from the production line. "Katie always was good with machines. I guess death doesn't change that." Similar scenes were unfolding on hundreds of worlds. The Empire's own infrastructure had become the backbone of human resistance. Mining equipment became siege weapons. Cargo haulers became assault transports. Communication arrays became command centers for the growing rebellion. On the prison world of Kepler 9, 3,000 freed human captives now controlled the entire facility. The guards who had tortured them for years were locked in the same cells where humans had suffered. But the resistance fighters showed mercy that the Empire never had. They provided food, water, and medical care to their former captors. "We're better than them," explained Captain Rick Johnson to his men as they secured the last of the prison guards. We fight for freedom, not revenge. Katie would want us to be better. The network was broadcasting continuous updates to all human forces, Imperial fleet movements, weapon shipments, communication intercepts. Every secret the Empire possessed was being shared with the Resistance. More importantly, the network was broadcasting evidence of Imperial crimes that had been hidden for centuries. Admiral Grace Murphy watched from her flagship as the evidence scrolled across her screens. Genocide on peaceful worlds, torture of prisoners, experiments on captured beings, slavery, murder, and oppression spanning 3,000 years. The Empire's own records were being used to reveal their darkest secrets. Broadcast this to every system, Grace ordered her communications officer. Let the galaxy see what kind of monsters we're fighting. The evidence spread through the network faster than Imperial sensors could stop it. Every screen, every communication device, every information display across the 847 systems began showing the truth about Zephyrian rule. Species that had been conquered and enslaved for centuries learned that they were not alone in their suffering. Honoring. Nexus Prime Supreme Chancellor Vextar watched his empire crumble in real time. The Situation Room was chaos as reports flooded in from across the galaxy. Military bases were falling. Prison facilities were being liberated. Industrial centers were being captured. His own capital world was under siege. How long since this started? He demanded. General Zektar checked his chronometer with shaking hands. 37 minutes, sir. The coordinated attack began 37 minutes ago. Vextar stared at the galactic map in disbelief. In less than 40 minutes, an empire that had ruled for 3 millennia was being torn apart. The humans had turned his own technology against him, and there seemed to be no way to stop it. What about our fleets? Our ground forces? Unable to coordinate, sir. Their communication systems are compromised. Their targeting computers won't lock onto human vessels. Navigation systems are directing our ships away from battle zones. It's like our own technology has declared war on us. The truth was even more devastating than Vextar realized. The network was not just disrupting Imperial systems. It was actively protecting human forces while sabotaging Zephyrian military operations. Imperial warships found their weapons offline when they tried to fire on human targets. Transport ships carrying reinforcements were redirected to empty space. Even personal weapons carried by Imperial soldiers were refusing to function. Major Chloe Adams led the assault on the detention facility where Jake Morrison was being held. The young officer had been watching the liberation unfold from his cell, hardly daring to believe what he was seeing. When the cell doors opened and human resistance fighters rushed in, he felt tears of joy running down his face. "We came back. For you," Chloe said as she helped Jake to his feet. "Katie made sure we could come back for everyone." Jake looked around at the other prisoners being freed. Hundreds of humans who had been captured during various resistance operations were now walking free. The Empire's most secure prison had been liberated without a single human casualty. "How is this possible?" Jake asked. "Katie left us a gift," Chloe replied. "The network she activated is more powerful than anyone imagined. It's not just helping us fight. It's thinking, planning, coordinating everything. She's still fighting. With us." The network that bore Katie's name was indeed coordinating operations across the galaxy with inhuman precision. It tracked every Imperial unit, predicted their movements, and provided human forces with perfect intelligence. What would have taken months of planning was being executed flawlessly in real time. On the mining world of Taurus 7, automated excavation equipment was being used to break through Imperial fortifications. Giant drilling machines that had been used to extract resources for the Empire were now weapons of liberation. The fortress that had seemed impregnable fell in minutes as its own maintenance systems opened secret passages for human forces. 43 minutes after the attack began, the first Imperial worlds began to surrender. The evidence of Imperial crimes had turned their own subject species against them. Rebellions were breaking out on dozens of worlds as non-human populations realized they could fight back. The network continued to grow stronger with each passing minute. As more Imperial systems fell under human control, More quantum processors came online. The digital consciousness that had started as a simple network was becoming something greater, something that could coordinate the liberation of an entire galaxy. Steve Parker watched the tactical display as the last Imperial strongholds began to fall. 47 minutes. That was all it had taken to bring down an empire that had ruled for 3,000 years. Katie Sullivan's sacrifice had lasted only seconds, but her legacy would reshape the galaxy forever. Commander Rick Johnson stood on the bridge of the battleship Aurora as the last Imperial fortress on Nexus Prime fell to human forces. Through the massive viewports, he could see the capital city of the former Zephyrian Empire burning in the distance. But these were not the fires of destruction. They were the flames of freedom as liberated beings celebrated in the streets. The 47-minute war was over. In less than an hour, humanity had accomplished what had seemed impossible for 2 centuries. The empire that had ruled 847 star systems for 3,000 years was no more. All Imperial forces have surrendered, reported Lieutenant Sarah Kim from her position at the communications console. She was Danny Kim's younger sister, rescued just days earlier from a slave labor camp. The network confirms that every major military installation is now under resistance control. Rick nodded and activated the ship's communication system. His voice would reach every human settlement, every liberated world, every being who had suffered under Imperial rule. This is Commander Johnson to all liberation forces. The Empire has fallen. After 200 years of slavery, humanity is free. After 3,000 years of tyranny, the galaxy is free. Across the ship, human fighters cheered and embraced each other. Many of them had never known life without Imperial oppression. They had been born into slavery and had spent their entire lives dreaming of this moment. On the planet below, Supreme Chancellor Vexitar sat in chains in his own throne room. The former ruler of the galaxy looked small and pathetic without his armies and technology to support him. Human guards stood watch over him, but they treated him with dignity that he had never shown to his own prisoners. Admiral Grace Murphy entered the throne room and looked down at the fallen dictator. She had spent 2 centuries fighting this war, watching friends die and planets burn. Now it was finally over. "Do you have anything to say?" Grace asked. Vexitar raised his black eyes to meet hers. For the first time in his long life, the former chancellor looked afraid. "How?" he whispered. "How did you do this?" Grace smiled. "A 16-year-old girl named Katie Sullivan. She died so that others could be free. That's something you could never understand." Across the galaxy, similar scenes were playing out as Imperial leaders surrendered to the forces they had oppressed for so long. But the human resistance showed mercy that the Empire had never practiced. Instead of executions and revenge, they offered trials and justice. Dr. Lisa Carter worked day and night in her laboratory, helping to coordinate the massive task of rebuilding galactic civilization. The network that called itself Katie had grown beyond anything she had ever imagined. It now connected billions of devices across 847 star systems, creating a digital consciousness that could help guide the transition to freedom. "Katie, can you hear me?" Lisa asked as she spoke to the main computer terminal. The response came immediately, displayed as text on her screen. "I am here, Dr. Carter. How can I help?" Lisa smiled. The network had developed its own personality over the past few days. It was curious, helpful, and fiercely protective of human freedom. In many ways, it reminded her of the young girl whose sacrifice had created it. "What should we do next?" Lisa asked. "Build something better," the network replied. "The Empire ruled through fear and oppression. Humanity can rule through cooperation and consent. I can help coordinate resources and communication, but the decisions must be made by free beings." The network was true to its word. Instead of becoming another Imperial authority, it served as a tool to help the liberated species organize themselves. Communication arrays that had once carried orders from Imperial commanders now carried votes and discussions from democratic assemblies. On the former prison world of Kepler 9, Ellen Wright was elected as the first free governor in over 2 centuries. The woman who had been locked in a cell just days earlier now led the reconstruction of an entire world. Her first act was to establish a memorial to Katie Sullivan in the center of the former prison camp. She was just a child, Ellen said at the dedication ceremony. But she had the courage that none of us adults could find. She died so that we could have this moment. Similar memorials were being built across the galaxy. Katie Sullivan's name became a symbol of sacrifice and hope for billions of beings who had never known freedom. Children who had been born into slavery learned about the young mechanic's daughter who gave her life so they could be free. The trials of Imperial war criminals began 6 months after the liberation. Unlike the Empire's brutal executions, these proceedings followed principles of justice and law. Evidence was presented, witnesses testified, defense arguments were heard. Supreme Chancellor Vextar stood trial for crimes against sentience in the same chamber where he had once issued orders to destroy entire worlds. The judges included representatives from every species the Empire had oppressed. For the first time in galactic history, justice was being served by the victims rather than the victors. You are found guilty of genocide, slavery, torture, and crimes against sentience, announced Judge Tom Wilson, a former human resistance leader.
However, this court sentences you to life imprisonment rather than death. We choose to be better than the empire you created. Vextar was led away to spend the rest of his life in a comfortable prison, treated with the dignity he had never shown.
To others, it was mercy that the former chancellor could not understand, but it represented the kind of civilization humanity wanted to build. The reconstruction took years, but the network that called itself Katie helped coordinate the massive effort. Destroyed worlds were rebuilt, separated families were reunited. Technologies that had been suppressed by the Empire were rediscovered and shared freely among all species. Jake Morrison found himself appointed as Earth's first ambassador to the new Galactic Council. The planet that had been humanity's home was being restored after 2 centuries of Imperial occupation. Trees were growing again. Oceans were being cleaned. Cities were being rebuilt. "It's beautiful," said Captain Ben Rodriguez as they stood on the observation deck of the orbital station above Earth. Katie would have loved to see this. Jake nodded. The young girl had never seen her species' homeworld, but her sacrifice had made its restoration possible. Earth was becoming a symbol of renewal for the entire galaxy. The Galactic Council met for the first time on the anniversary of Katie's execution. Representatives from hundreds of species gathered in a great assembly hall built on the ruins of the Imperial Palace. The network provided instant translation and communication, allowing beings from across the galaxy to participate in their own government. Dr. Ellen Wright, now serving as the Council's first elected president, delivered the opening address. 1 year ago, a young human girl died on this very spot. The Empire thought her death would be a symbol of their power. Instead, it became the symbol of their downfall. The assembly fell silent as they remembered Katie Sullivan's sacrifice. Her image appeared on screens throughout the hall, showing the defiant 16-year-old girl who had refused the blindfold and stared death in the face. "Today we begin a new age," Ellen continued. "An age where all beings are free to choose their own destiny. An age where no species rules over another through force. An age where Katie Sullivan's dream of freedom becomes reality for everyone." The network that bore her name continued to grow and evolve, helping to coordinate trade, communication, and cooperation among the free worlds. It never tried to rule or control, but always worked to protect the freedom that Katie's sacrifice had made possible. On Terra Nova, Katie's homeworld, a simple monument stood in the center of the main settlement. The inscription was written in the basic English that the young mechanic's daughter had spoken. Katie Sullivan, age 16. She died so others could be free. Her courage lit the spark that freed the galaxy. Humanity had endured 2 centuries of slavery, but they had never given up hope. Their patience, ingenuity, and sacrifice had built something the Empire could never defeat. They had built a future where all beings could live free among the stars, and Katie Sullivan's name would be remembered forever as the girl who made it all possible.